Thanks so much. It's really awesome to be here. And it's awesome to have Kathleen here as well, our partner from Cox Communications. So we're gonna walk through a little bit of slides that we have prepared for today, just 5 or 6 slides. But mainly, it's going to be a conversation about what are the lessons we've learned from the deployments that we made and from Kathleen's experience, over 25 years of sales experience, and the impact that artificial intelligence can have on a workforce. So I have my screen here. Great. So today, what we're going to be discussing is what is truly the impact of artificial intelligence on how expertise is built and shared. And in order to sort of understand this, I think it's very helpful to go way back to how as humans, how we build and share expertise. And so if you look at the first, this is the background of the company. I forgot about this slide, so caught me by surprise. But we're a Silicon Valley-based company spun out of the artificial intelligence lab at Stanford, chaired by the founder of Google X, some well-known folks from Andreessen Horowitz and Greylock Partners backing us. And we built some of the sort of iconic products at OpenAI, at Google and Facebook, and really focused on this problem of now how do you take expertise and how do you help share it. So if you go back thousands of years to 1800 BC, the Epic of Gilgamesh was the first actually example of written text that survived to now. And in that text, it's an epic of war and battle and lessons learned. And it was the first example where someone basically took a story and figured out what were the lessons to be extracted from it. What are the things I learned from this lesson? What are the things that I wouldn't do next time? And sat down and wrote it down on a tablet. And then that tablet was then distributed and survived thousands of years to now. And it was a sort of the longest living example of this kind of thing, where we humans, what we did is that we effectively figured out what are the things that we want to pass along to the next generation, or what are the things that we're going to pass along in written form to our team, to other folks. And the issue with tablets, obviously, is it was very difficult to produce one. You have to get a really big slab of rock. It takes hours, it takes months to even get a couple lines in. And so naturally, there's not really many existing or sort of currently existing forms of tablets for us from early civilization. And this really shifted. The major shift that happened was in 1600. And in 1600 was when Johannes Gutenberg built the first printing press. And so this is a later incarnation of a printing press. This is a sort of steam-powered printing press. But what the printing press unlocked is it unlocked for the first time the ability to replicate knowledge cheaply. So if you wanted to write a book and you had a great idea, you had a lot of great lessons that you learned, or some tacit knowledge you had picked up, before, it was in the 12th century and 13th century, it took a long time to write a book, and it was very expensive. So the only folks who could afford books were monks and sort of the elite and the noble clergy. And the printing press really made it cheap to sort of be able to produce a book. And so all of a sudden, because the cost of books went down, they could be spread throughout the sort of Europe. And that's what sort of led to what many folks would say the Renaissance and all these kinds of revolutions, because of the distribution of this kind of knowledge in a cheap fashion. But the challenge still here is, even though books could be now made cheaply and spread cheaply, the challenge still is that it's still really hard to write a book, because you have to sort of figure out what you're trying to say and what are your lessons, how do you extract those lessons, and how do you put them down into a format that you can read it. And then it's also really hard to read a book. At the same time, you're not just writing a book, you're also having to figure out how to read it. And so what AI really does, and that's the impact that we believe that will happen, is it's effectively a book that writes itself. And so what we're going to talk about today is the impact of artificial intelligence for a very specific line of work, which is basically a line of work that every single company in the world has, and about 25% of the world is currently in, and that's specifically in sales. And in sales, you have all kinds of tacit knowledge and expertise that top performers accumulate over years of experience. How to answer questions, how to have sort of overcome objections, how to ask the right sort of discovery, how to position and promote the product in the right way. And this kind of tacit knowledge, the challenge is it's locked up often in the heads of a few of the top performers. And oftentimes, if you're new on a team or if you're a low performer, you would wish that you had the experience and the task knowledge that the best and top performers have. And so what we do, what specifically Cresta does as a company, is we build software that learns from the expertise of the top performers and helps distribute that expertise to everybody else. But instead of writing it as a book that's distributed to everybody, what it does is it looks at the conversations of the top performers over the last year. So here are the conversations that the top salespeople had over the last year, and here's where they did things really effectively, and here's where they did things poorly, and which ones led to successful outcomes. And then in real time, the algorithm looks at those conversations, identifies those outcomes, and then uses that to predict what is the coaching and what is the suggestion to give to each new rep. And so in real time, if you're a new rep on the floor, you're basically getting real-time prompts and real-time coaching on what behaviors to adopt and what suggestions to make, as though you have effectively an expert coach sitting on your shoulder and guiding you through the conversation. And so what this looks like from a sort of on the left, from an agent perspective, you're sort of having a conversation and the system is giving you real-time prompts. Over here, it's sort of giving you a prompt that you have an objection, and so now's the right time to really address concerns and overcome the objection, and gives you a recommended response and how you can respond to the customer at that point in time. And then for a supervisor, it helps them sort of look at specific behavioral areas for the top reps and for the worst reps, and look on a per conversation basis, what were examples where the reps sort of followed the behavior or didn't follow behavior. So in orange, for example, for those conversations, they did not follow behavior. And in green, they did follow behavior. But these are just meant to be sort of screenshots and GIFs of what the experience actually looks like, so it can be more concrete as an experience. And the impact of this is really, truly tremendous. So we've been working with Kathleen and her teams for the last 18 months now, and they've truly been fantastic partners. And so these are some of the early results that we worked on about 18 months ago now, and the results have really been built upon from here, and we've gotten significantly higher results since then. I think Kathleen's going to share a little bit more, but this quarter we're outperforming these. But in the first sort of results what we did is that we took a group of 40 of Kathleen salespeople, and we gave half of them Cresta and the other half Active Control. And then we did a 6-week A/B test where the agents with Cresta sold with the software with the real-time recommendations and the real-time prompts, and the agents without Cresta sold in the usual way. And what we found is that the agents with Cresta had $25.52 of incremental lifetime revenue per conversation. And so they were selling more on every single conversation. And that translated to $13.1 million of incremental annualized lifetime revenue. And so these are results that we got in our first deployment that we worked on together. But we've sort of been able to build upon this, and we have even stronger results now. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I'm really excited to share, these are all sort of high-level slides. I think the real sort of star of the show is Kathleen, because Kathleen has over 25 years of experience in sales and sales expertise, and how to supervise salespeople, how to train salespeople. And the interesting thing is she'll share some of her lessons and insights and learnings from early days in her supervisor career, and some of the sort of challenges that she saw there, and like how Crest has been able to be a game changer for the kind of work that they do. So yeah, so these are roughly my slides and sort of set the stage. I'd really like to open it up now to Kathleen in terms of the conversation.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me today. I love this discussion. Of course, I'm pretty passionate, having been in sales my whole life. But what your introduction and the slides really resonated with me, and it took me back to my very, very first sales leadership role. And so taking you guys back, that's talking about late 90s, and in a wireless store, you're thinking about a sales floor in retail. And as any supervisor, right, you immediately start to go through your numbers, look at the traffic, trying to identify trends, where are those, significant areas where you can, increase some sort of performance. And I had one rep who 3 days of the week would completely exceed, the daily expectations. And then 2 days, he would not. And so I was so confused, because obviously he seemed to have the skill set, right, and the will. And so when I met with him, I pulled him in the office to show him what he was missing from a compensation perspective by not, executing on those 2 days. He shared with me that Well, on those 2 days, boss, I sit on the other side of the floor because you're fully staffed. And so I don't get to sit over near, Angie and Liz and everybody else. So I am not getting to hear what they do to overcome objections. And that kind of helps me when I get into kind of a pinch. And so, of course, when we started partnering together and working with this program, it was like, oh my gosh, yes, it's real time. That the reps are all able to learn from each other in this way, and it's not threatening in any way. Which, if I may comment, in the beginning, there definitely was a little bit from some of our chat reps of what is this platform? How do they know anything better than I do? I'm the expert. I think you and your team heard that sometimes. There was some pushback.
Yeah.
But once the team knew that it was coming from Aaron, the top sales, all the learnings were coming from their peers that they already were leveraging every day to try to, make sales. They just no longer had to yell across the sales floor to ask a question to their peer. They were able to, get the real-time coaching from across the platform. So, it's very rewarding to me to see how the reps have embraced it. You alluded earlier in Q1 of this year, even during all of the lockdown, part of Q2, we've continued to increase our conversion another 2.5 points, I believe it was. And that's with all the reps being dispersed. No one's in the center. They're all working from home.
Yeah, there's so much there. I'm so curious about. You mentioned that you had a really top performer rep early on in your career who had that 2 days where he was away from the group and 3 days where he was with the group. I'm curious, how did you address the problem back then when there wasn't really a technology solution to solve it?
It was so fun. It's funny. So I had to meet with the team, and it was funny because there was definitely ownership. When I came in, I want to sit at this place. There was definitely a little bit of a hierarchy, so to speak, with the reps of who gets to sit where. And I had to have a conversation of how we would rotate and how we would, include or have others sit, like separate the floor. We had to do all these different things to try to make sure they were sharing best practices. Later, maybe a year later is when, we started to have IM and stuff so the team could communicate to each other, with their peer across the floor. That was probably the first step. But that was in a floor. I have also led large organizations, of sales reps across a whole region, and they're not sitting next to each other. They're out. And so we had to, create different ways for them to communicate with each other real time to ask questions and things like that. And it still isn't very smooth, right? That's kind of awkward because you're pausing on the customer, sending something to your teammate, but it's something that has been consistent through all of my teams, is that those reps need to have that constant encouragement and other suggestions and recommendations from their peers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that totally makes sense. And then you alluded to it, like sort of the shift to working from home, that whole model completely changes where everyone now has to sort of work remotely, and they don't have that kind of both the energy of that sales floor and also sort of the task of knowledge sharing. So as a sales leader, how do you think about that?
We just had a quarterly business review with the team, and the supervisors and manager, and were sharing how they were so lucky to have this due to the fact that they went from overnight not having a work from home plan to having all of their team dispersed. And from their perspective, from the supervisor's perspective, another asset is that they're allowed to see real time the inconsistencies, or if a rep is struggling in a certain area, and then be able to reach out to them and engage them right at home and say, hey, what's going on? I saw the last week we're really struggling consistently with setting the table, which is one of our behaviors that we measure, right? So if we didn't have that, right, the old way of doing it, they would be taking and combing through a bunch of chat transcripts, trying to find examples, trying to put together a story to help their team. Or same thing with call center, right? The old days is you sit there and you listen to a bunch of calls, you find some good ones you want to coach. Everything here is real time, and they're able to really dive in and assist their team. So I mean, it's been valuable to us there. The reps, of course, since they're able to engage and get suggestions, it keeps them on their toes, consistent to their flow. It also has helped because they've been able to handle more chats at once, because the recommendations kind of keep them going versus any struggles or overcoming some objections. So that's helped us take on all the volume that we saw during, Q2 with the COVID. We saw a huge increase in chat volume, and this was another way to leverage handling that because they increased their concurrency. So lots of benefits there.
Wow, yeah. You mentioned that you saw an increase in volume. What was that predominantly driven by?
Well, Cox Communications, of course, provides great internet service. And during this time, everyone was working from home. So everyone was, coming in, either wanting to upgrade their speeds, set up service. We also gave a product back to the community for anyone that qualified for student lunches. We were offering them, basically a discounted internet service so all the kids at home could still do their online learning. So we had a huge influx of questions and people wanting to engage during online versus some of our other sales channels because like our retail stores were closed. Our feet on the street sales team was not working. So everyone kind of migrated to the digital space, which drove a lot more volume for our team.
That's awesome. Yeah. And definitely like myself, we needed to, as soon as the shift to work from home, everyone needed bigger internet plans and everyone's sort of sharing the same video bandwidth.
Yes. Yes.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. That's awesome. And one of the things that you did mention there was that sort of the results that we've been working on together now for about 18 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of been built better. And you mentioned a little bit to the fact that there was some anxiety early on in terms of or some worry about adopting a technology like this from the rep level and the agent level. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just them. I believe you probably hear it throughout the news or anywhere else out in society. People get scared of the AI and everyone's going to come take my job. And the reps actually, once they realized that the platform and the tool was there to help them and it was taking all the learnings from their peers, they embraced it. And we saw receptivity levels go from the low 20s to now we're in the 50%. So they're all using it because they know that the suggestions are coming from them. And just to divert a little bit from the AI piece, we also had, feedback, pre-Cresta of when we would come up with chat flows, from the training department, or we would write some, and they would always, the reps would look at us like, this is great. This is not what happens during an engagement. You guys don't know what we're dealing with. So, again, they want to talk and engage with their peers that live in the trenches with them every day and know what it takes to get through the day to be successful. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And for that particular piece, when you did roll out a new call flow, from my understanding, you would sort of sample a few conversations and use that to generate the call flow. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're doing that before AI?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily the best method. So we would, you have different customer interactions. Obviously, you've got a brand new customer coming in. You have a current customer, which is a much more complex situation, right? Of what they want to do with their account, what are their options. And so a new customer flow is really what most of the reps, loved engaging with, just because it was naturally an easier transaction. But the current customer flow, which is much more complex, and there's a lot more areas to navigate through. We would try to pull different chats and say, okay, it sounds like this flow should handle a majority of the conversations they're having, and we were not moving the needle at all in our current chat flow or our production, which is 70% of who we're talking to today. So there's a huge opportunity for us to maximize this space. And just at the beginning of this year, we worked with the team, and your team was able to, of course, much more effectively go through thousands and thousands of chats and really help us guide a true current customer interaction and what that should look like and the 5 behaviors that we should hit. And the team launched that in January. And we're going up and to the right. We're still not where we want to be, but we've gone up and to the right every month. And again, this is a tough space, but it's one with the most opportunity. So we're excited about what's going to happen in the next quarter. I want to say this week, Brandon from your team, I think we've got like 3 of the coaches now in the 40s for receptivity for current customer chat. So,
yeah, absolutely. Brandon is truly fantastic, and working with your team, I know it's a joy to both him and us being able to partner so closely on bringing this to bear. So as a pioneer in sort of implementing AI for a business process, sales process, that's a title. You're early pioneer in this space, and so that's what advice would you have for other sort of business leaders who are thinking about implementing AI in their business process and how they should be thinking about it?
I think everyone needs to, I mean, how do I say it? It's all around us, everywhere, right? Our Apple Watch is sending me a little reminder that I need to, get up, walk, get my steps in. And we all need to look at how these can help our teams and change the lens and how we embrace it. And I think it can be used across all sales and retention type areas. And I think it can be used in all channels, not just necessarily, I think, call center. I think this can be used and built in a way that can also someday help, outside sales teams as well. Because you think about that, right? They're on their own, they're out there, they can get easily distracted and send it. So how can we take these tools and continue to help them and give support and just give them their little reminders when they're out there on their own that come from, their peers of how to be successful. I know that we are continuing to look at how we can expand, this tool, and we're playing in the retention space, which is, I think, new for you, new for us. But look at those conversations when you're talking to our most important customers, the customers that for some reason may want to end the relationship with us. How do we make sure that we are giving our reps the best tools consistently and the best responses and the best hints to maximize that customer experience for that customer, right? And so I think that there's unlimited opportunity and possibility for us to play with AI and in sales and retention type space.
Understood, and that absolutely makes sense. And I do agree with you that there's the opportunity for every sort of customer interaction that a company has. There's really an opportunity to augment the experience and both help the rep in terms of delivering the best experience, and then really deliver the best experience to the customer and maximize the value that they see. When you choose to work with partners in this space, why did you choose to work with us, and what do you look for in partners in this kind of space?
Well, again, like I said, the tool immediately resonated with me based off of my experience previously and how important it is for reps to share best practices. But there hasn't been anything that we've worked on that if I raise my hand on something that I don't have a good answer to, your team has been so flexible in diving in and finding out answers and even educating us sometimes on some experiences that maybe we weren't aware was happening in that space. So I think your flexibility and willingness to understand our objectives, our needs, what we're trying to do for our customers and for our employees has been probably what's made us, work so well together. And the teams obviously work extremely well together. They have a really good relationship. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I'm really proud about is being able to help foster that kind of really strong relationships between the teams. So that's really awesome.
Well, and I have to add this real quick. So for any of those listening that have had to look through thousands of chat transcripts or listen to thousands and thousands of, call center calls, it's much easier when you have a partner that's able to do it through AI and quickly identify trends and themes. It allows you to move a lot quicker and make responses and answers a lot quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the kind of work that software is really good at, being able to look at a lot of conversations and figure out trends and emerge sort of themes and how to use those to iterate upon sales process and improve sales process. So that's definitely a huge impact. That's been awesome. One of the things I found interesting recently, and if you don't mind sharing, is that because of COVID, there was a big shift in terms of field sales reps sort of converting to online sales reps. And I've been seeing it across the industry where you have, whether it's a retail store that had a lot of in-person salespeople at the retail store that can no longer sort of sell in person. Mm-hmm. And now they've had to shift all their sales to online, or whether it's CogX that had a lot of door-to-door or field sales force. And that sales model has completely changed. I'd love to get your thoughts on that and where you see that where you saw that shift and how you see that playing out over the next year or so.
Yeah, I think all companies right now are I think everyone kind of got a pulse check of, how do we make sure we have, the right channels available to our customers to do business where they want to do, but how are we also preparing for the future? And how do we take resources that may, put them in a different spot to execute, and what tools do we give them so they can easily transition from maybe being a retail store rep to being a chat center rep? How do we, what do we need to do in that space? To caveat off of that, when we saw all of that volume, we had to quickly hire agents. And think about it, they're getting hired remotely, they're getting set up at home by themselves. And so to have tools in place that quickly allow them to learn the sales flow and keep them going through the transactions. For that example, I think we shaved 2 weeks off of our training because, Cresta helps a lot with the sales part, the sales training and keeping them on floor. So having the right tools in play to evolve this space, if that's what's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months, is going to be important for all organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think the customer expectations changed post-COVID, or what are you seeing from your customers in terms of how they're wanting to interact with your brand?
It's interesting. I think the customer, so many more customers are there in the digital space. And when I mean that, then that their expectations are high. We got plenty of feedback, even with like our virtual assistant. Like my virtual assistant should be able to answer this for me. Why is your virtual assistant asking me 3 questions? Why doesn't he know already? Why is his knowledge base? We had one customer, why is his knowledge base not where it needs to be? And so, the customers are definitely coming into this space.
Yeah, that's good. It keeps all of us on our toes to to deliver. Yeah, and then last question: Do you sort of think that when the world does resume back to normal and folks are sort of getting back to sort of, I hear you told me Arizona is already opened up, but do you think that sort of folks will have already adopted the digital experience and will continue to use that, or do you think that we'll see all the sort of traffic shift back to in-store and in person?
That is the debate. We've had lots of conversations about this over the last 2 weeks. I think a piece are definitely going to stay in the digital space. And I think some might still prefer their traditional types of channels, but I think a piece of it will now continue to go online. Definitely, in the shopping space. If you go to even in Arizona, you go to any of the malls or any of the shops, and everyone's just, I think, transitioned to purchasing sneakers, clothes, everything online over the last couple of weeks. So I think that's going to be a hard area.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for taking the time for this presentation. I've really enjoyed sort of working with you over the last 18 months, and it's been really fun working together and sort of figuring out how to really bring AI to bear in these sales processes.
Thank you. Thanks for the partnership.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.